Welcome to Face to Face. This is a show about change and about what's next. It's a show that wants to ask questions, peel back the layers of our average everyday experience, and go beyond scratching the surface. We interview amazing people with incredible ideas and stories who have done wild, weird, and wonderful things. Remember that imagination shared creates collaboration, and collaboration creates community, and community inspires social change. I'm David Peck, and this is Face to Face. I've been waiting a long time for this interview. This is with Mark Vander Vennen of the Shalem Mental Health Network. We've been talking about getting together. We've been talking about talking together for an awfully long time. And Mark is a genuine, deeply relational, authentic and transparent guy. He's the executive director of the Shalem Mental Health Network and doing some pretty incredible work. And we talk a lot in today's podcast about things like restorative practice and wraparound work, and about how we need to build deeper relationships to have an impact from a community perspective. This is about self-awareness and about the professionalization of care. He talks a great deal about what keeps him awake at night. This, again, it's an engaging and compelling interview. I wish I'd written a chapter about this in my best-selling book, Real Change. Don't forget, check us out online, davidpecklive.com. I think, we're in our 50th printing. That's 50 copies, actually. So our 51st printing is coming any day soon. davidpecklive.com. Another initiative we're involved in, the Mosquitoes Suck Tour, don'tbiteme.ca. Check us out. Hope you enjoyed today's interview with Mark. I think you will. Well, welcome to Face to Face. We have a very special guest. I know I say that every week, but we have a very special guest here today with us, Mark Vander Vennen from the Shalem Mental Health Network in Hamilton. Thanks for joining us, Mark.
Thank you, David. It's a treat to be here.
How long we've been trying to book this for? About 17 years? Is that right?
Could be.
Yeah.
Well, I've only been here 11.
Oh, okay.
So it's been a little less than that.
So we were probably communicating in a former life, is what you're saying. Yeah. This one's been a real challenge to book, but that's mostly because I think we're both pretty busy people, not because neither of us wanted to actually do it. I think I've been really looking forward to this for a lot of reasons. We're going to talk about mental health today. We're going to hear a little bit about Mark and what he does, why he's the executive director of the Shalem Mental Health Network. We're doors away from the YMCA in Hamilton. Hamilton's a really interesting place. There's a lot of, I think, cool is just not even the right word at all, but engaging and holistic programs at work here. I was at the Peace Breakfast yesterday, 400 or 500 people there, and just remarkable and really, inspirational. I mean, the 7:30 a.m. start I could have done without, but it was pretty awesome, pretty amazing. So let's talk about that, and hopefully we can chisel away at maybe some of the preconceived ideas too about what mental health really is all about. So, I mean, personally, I would call myself a melancholic soul.
Right.
Sure. I don't know that I have depression in my history.
Yeah.
I definitely, would describe myself from time to time as being depressed. I've been on medication in the past years ago. I've suffered a divorce. Yeah. I mean, I've gone through counseling.
Right.
We hear about these crazy stories in the news. Yes. These and I mean crazy in the sense of over the top, the shootings or abuse stories, and we go, oh, mental health, but it's way more nuanced than that, isn't it? I mean, and also way more of a problem in a sense, and so I just wonder how you might respond to that.
Absolutely,
the ubiquity of it almost.
Yeah, it's out there. I sometimes talk about, the line about 6 degrees of separation. Right. But I think when it comes to mental health, it's more like 2 or 3 degrees of separation. Mm-hmm. We're that connected to either we ourselves who've got a mental health issue that we're struggling with, or a loved one, or a family member. It's like I like that term, ubiquitous. It does seem to be out there.
Well, it's kind of everywhere, Yeah. I mean, and I wonder to what degree, we're sort of, in a sense, at a place of almost recovery. The way you talk about reactions, the pendulum's one side, the pendulum's the other, and then maybe we'll balance off the dialectical sort of angle. people have been kind of afraid, in a way, to talk about mental health issues, haven't they?
Absolutely.
And if that's true, is that changing?
I think it's changing. I do think your pendulum metaphor is probably accurate. There's a lot less stigma now around conversation around mental health issues. Some of that is due to things like the Bell Talks campaign, Clara Hughes, public figures like Sheila Rogers from the CBC, and others talking about their own journey with depression or bipolar or whatever it might be. And they have been very courageous people who have made themselves vulnerable in public. But from the point of view of we want to change the secrecy, the cloak of secrecy that surrounds mental health issues, and we want this to be a topic of conversation.
Why? I mean, why is it? Why is there this secrecy around it? I personally don't get it.
No.
I don't know. I've always sort of considered myself an open book, and if somebody asks me a pointed question and I think they're sincere, I'm going to answer it.
I think
what's up with that?
I think it has a lot to do with shame. We may feel ashamed about the fact that we struggle with something. It also may have to do with our upbringings.
Right.
So,
yeah.
If as growing up and your parents were the type of folks who would say, just buckle up and grit your teeth and go for it.
Stiff upper lip.
Stiff upper lip.
Thing.
Yeah. So there may be a whole constellation of reasons as to why, but I think shame is powerful. And shame is a really basic human emotion. We all experience it and we all feel it.
Do you make a distinction between shame and guilt?
I do.
Okay.
Shame is about who we are. It's guilt might be something that we've done that we can repair. Shame is about who we are, and it also can be repaired.
Do you mean like shame in the sense of which a friend of mine would say, the I am nots, like I'm not worthy, I'm not acceptable,
yes,
I'm
exactly,
not loved,
exactly.
I'm not pretty enough, I'm not talented enough.
With guilt, you might say I messed up.
Right,
with shame,
right.
you might say I'm a schmuck.
Right.
I'm an idiot.
And Mark, from a mental health perspective, to me, it's the kind of thing that you don't actually ever say to yourself. You just, for good or for ill, you live within that framework, right?
Right. I think when we're processing shame well, we, first of all, we find ways to process shame, and that's usually through conversation and relationship. But also, we're able to hold that and not be dysregulated by it. We're able to say, oh, I'm feeling ashamed about that, or there's an aspect of me that I'm really uncomfortable with and ashamed about, but I'm not going to let that unmoor me. I'm going to try move beyond it and deal with it. Sometimes
I've wondered, I, having suffered some of these issues myself, and to what degree, I guess, is up for argument. You'd probably have to talk to my former therapist, I suppose. But I wonder to what degree that we're doing a disservice to ourselves, really, aren't we? And I think, don't we all just need relationship?
Absolutely.
Don't we all just need, substantive, authentic, transparent conversation, good
Absolutely.
friendships? And I've wondered if sometimes you guys would be out of business if more folk on the street, families, were actually talking about these things.
Absolutely.
Could you imagine what it would be, how healing it would be for my mom and me?
Right.
Exactly. To talk about her past and mine.
Absolutely.
Why is that such a crazy idea?
Well, it's not a crazy idea, but for whatever reasons, there are obstacles to it, but it's very much what we are working towards. We do a lot of work in restorative practice, restorative justice. It comes out of the restorative justice field, but really restorative practice is about how do we have healthy relationships, build strong communities, and have difficult conversations in a safe way in any variety of contexts, maybe at schools, in workplaces, or in faith communities, for example. And it's not that difficult, but it does take a little bit of a shift. Sometimes we develop relational habits or conversational habits that end up being a little bit of dead ends. But if we create spaces of safety, if everyone has a voice and has a meaningful voice, things can happen that allow us to move, process shame, for example, and work through stuff. The neurobiology happening now, the neuroscience, is astounding in what it's showing us around how wired we are for relationship as human beings. It's very clear that even at a very biological level, we need relationship as much as we need food and air and water.
So I love the fact that we seem to be wired for relationships, and I truly do believe that. However, I'm a bit uncomfy with that, only because it opens up another door for me that I don't like, which means I'm wired towards shame. I'm wired towards promiscuity. I'm wired towards, stealing. It's in my DNA,
right.
Mark.
Okay.
I can't do anything about it. And by the way, you better check your desk before we leave today. Well, I'm just wired that way.
I would say we're wired for a healthy relationship.
Okay.
And the kinds of things you're talking about, whatever impulses there might be in that direction, come from some sort of fracture or break in relationship that was maybe not healthy. But again, if, like for example, with restorative practice, if we can create safe spaces for those conversations, if there are ways that you could express those things in a safe way without being judged or blamed or...
I was just going to say, for you, safe space means listening, affirming, and not judging.
Not judging. It also means respect, being respectful, and also challenging one another. So it's not just...
But you can only do that once you've built the relationship to a certain point, or you have the trust or whatever, right?
Exactly.
So as a practitioner, as a mental health provider, as a psychologist, psychiatrist, do you think more listening than speaking in a conversation?
There's an awful lot of listening, and I think just as a society and a culture, we need to learn how to listen.
Yeah, we kind of suck at it, right?
We're actually quite poor at it.
Yeah. And I'm a high offender. Sometimes I can... You know what's weird? I seem to listen better with people that I don't know.
Yeah.
So my family, my kids, my wife, my mom, I don't know, because I know them well.
Right.
And I can multitask well, and it's not fair, really, is it? But I don't know if that's common or not. But
well, I'll tell you a story about our staff.
I'm actually here for some free counseling.
Hey,
today,
no
Mark.
problem.
Yeah, I just can't afford you guys. Yeah.
You could buy me lunch later.
That's right.
So I'll tell you a story about our staff here at Shalem. So we have a staff of about 12. We meet monthly as a staff for a staff meeting. We've dispensed with the usual way of doing staff meetings, and we do it in a restorative way. And here's what I mean by that.
Nice. I like the sound of it.
Yeah. So every staff meeting, each staff member is asked the same 3 questions, and they all know this ahead of time. And the questions are: celebrate a success, first of all; a lesson learned, secondly; and thirdly, what's coming up. And we use a talking piece. So we set ourselves up in a circle, and we have a talking piece, and it's different each month, and it may have some symbolic significance of some kind. But the notion is that the talking piece gets passed around the circle. Staff don't have to answer the questions if they don't want. They can pass. But only the person with the talking piece may speak.
So is this like a peace pipe, sort of?
Something like that. And so it's had a dramatic... Just that little shift in how we do conversation has had a dramatic shift on our culture as a staff, and from the point of view of listening. So when the person with the talking piece is speaking, you can't interrupt. You're not having a side conversation with the person sitting next to you. You're forced to listen, and staff talk about that. So staff who tend to talk a lot talk about what a shift that was for them. Staff who tend to be quiet talk about, I'm talking more now. There's more space for me to talk. So it's been a powerful exercise in listening, and what it's done is really developed relationships amongst
it's good.
staff.
It sounds to me like it's almost a celebration or an opportunity to honor the moment a bit more.
Yeah.
I'm doing a lot more restorative and meditative yoga, and this idea of 90 minutes to myself is ridiculous to find that in a week, but also something that it's kind of like water for me, honestly.
Yeah.
If I don't get it, I'm really, which is pretty funny, annoyed, which is so not sort of meditative or restorative, but I really miss it.
Yeah.
And it's about, and I'm crummy at staying in the moment. I really am. My kids have helped with that. My wife, Elizabeth, has helped with that.
Yeah.
But I'm getting better.
Yeah.
So there is hope. But I wonder, you got the stick.
Yeah.
okay, my turn.
Right.
And when it's and it's about being listening's about being in the moment.
Well,
right?
and there's something about what you were saying too about the yoga and missing it. There's something about ritual.
Yeah, I think so too.
A year and a half into this process with the staff, I thought, well, it's the same questions every time. Maybe they're getting a little stale. I'll mix it up a little bit. So I did, and I had a near riot on my hands. It didn't go very well.
It's pretty funny.
There's something about the consistency and the reliability.
Sure, yeah.
It takes on a bit of a ritual quality.
Yeah, sure.
And I'm impressed by how important ritual is in our lives.
Well, and isn't this really about the iconic kind of edge to most religious traditions?
Right.
The kneeling when you pray,
Right.
the Catholic
Right.
lighting of the candles,
Yeah.
the incense for Buddhists, and so
Yeah.
on, right? There's something to be said for that. There's a pro and a con, it seems to me,
Sure.
right? Because you can become really lazy.
It has
about
to be
too.
a living thing.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
has to be a living practice. But rituals are as simple as birthday parties,
Right.
for example.
Right.
And I think as a society or a culture, we're losing rituals.
Right.
But
right.
it's a deep human
Right.
need.
Yeah, yeah. There's something. Well, I think back to your earlier comment. There's a safety about that.
Right.
There's a
Exactly.
space for it. It seems, in some regards. So, why are you involved in this mental health work? What was it that drew you in? Always interested to know why somebody's doing something other than making lots of money.
Yeah, sure. I've had my own mental health history. So prior to becoming a therapist and a social worker, I went through my own counseling, therapy kind of work, and that has been very important in my own development. But ironically, it was not that got me into the field. At a certain point, I was actually working in children's theater in Toronto, and we were doing a lot of work with kids in schools and a lot of theater games and exercises. And it started to feel like we were actually doing therapy with these kids.
Wow.
So that kind of piqued my interest. But then I thought,
were you guys performing pieces at schools?
And but I don't have, and this may sound funny, I don't have an overwhelming desire to quote unquote help people. And I thought, well, maybe that's a handicap.
You mean then or now or both?
Both.
Huh. Okay.
And so I went to a therapist friend of mine and said this, that I'm thinking about going into this field, but I'm worried that this is an obstacle. And he said to me, that's exactly what would make you a good therapist. And so that's then I got into it. And a colleague of mine teaches psychotherapy at a local university. And his first class, he says, who is here because they want to help people? And people raise their hands, some of them. And he says, then you're probably in the wrong field. So there's something about getting into this field where it's not about, if you have an overwhelming desire to help people, you will probably be getting in the way of what people actually need to do to make their lives better. It becomes your agenda rather than the person who's coming.
So then what is the motivation?
So I am fascinated by what makes people tick. Who are we as human beings? What is this about the wiring between us that makes relationships so critical? What makes for healthy relationships, and what makes for relationships that are broken, and how do those things get transformed back towards health? So I have a kind of anthropological interest.
Sure. So
obviously, I'm really interested in people. I want.
Of course.
People
how can you tell me at the beginning of the interview it's all about relationships?
Yeah,
And
exactly.
then go, I don't really give a rat's ass about people, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of, but so I get that.
Right.
I totally get that.
Right.
But I'm really interested in that. So is that about ego, in a way?
It could be, yeah. I mean, if your ego as a therapist is wrapped up in helping your client,
Right.
Then your solution for that client will very likely fit what you think needs to happen.
Right. This is more about me than it is about you.
Exactly.
I might not speak, but I might not be listening either.
Exactly.
Yeah. You know what? So I've often wondered
Yeah.
if people in the social work, international development, sort of my field,
Yeah.
certainly the mental health field, if they're suffering from mental health issues themselves.
Well,
so
yeah.
they get into it for the wrong
Exactly.
reasons.
Well,
right?
or it could be the right reasons. I've often said all therapists get into the field because they need therapy themselves.
Right.
And
which may be a comment about us as human beings, not as therapists, right?
The good ones are the ones who know that,
right?
And the bad ones are the ones who don't. So if you
self-awareness is key.
If you don't know that, then you're trying to work out your own stuff through your client, and that's not helpful. If you do know that, then you're working at separating what you need to do from what your client needs.
Right. Yeah, I would think too that, I mean, I don't know if I would be very good at it, because I think there's a part of me that I have trouble sort of detaching myself from others' issues, and maybe you become better at it, but you also have to, you almost have to develop a thick skin in a way. Oh gee, we're coming to the end of our time here today. As somebody's laying their heart on the table, they just rip their heart out and put it on the table. What do you how do you reconcile with that? That's got to be pretty tough. You just drink a lot? Is that
no? That's why your colleagues are so important.
Right. So your support mechanism, right?
Exactly. And whatever else. I mean, for me, I have a lovely, beautiful family, and that's a huge support for me.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
But your colleagues are really important, and you vent with them, not with your client. You're dealing with an abuse survivor.
And is that would you say that's a way to recharge almost?
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So it's internal and external relationships that are fundamentally essential to good mental health. And how do you take care of your mental health?
Well,
so me, I have a melancholic soul.
Right.
I like dark movies.
Right.
My wife Elizabeth doesn't. She's the one who smiles more than I do, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
Classic story. And if she was here, she'd tell it to you in a better way. But we're driving through the Holland Marsh, and it's dark and kind of rainy. And I look over and I go, that's a funnel cloud.
Right.
Thinking, tornado coming across. It was actually a rainbow.
Oh yeah.
And so Elizabeth loves to tell this story. Yeah, figures you saw death and destruction, and I see life and beauty and richness, And it's funny and kind of tragic in its own way, but that's what makes us a good team.
I was going to say, it's probably why you're married. Yeah.
So how do you take care of yourself?
Well,
mentally?
It's critical.
I mean you, but also others.
Well, one of the things I really stress here at Shalem is, as therapists, social workers, you have to take time off. And so it's easy to overwork yourself, but if you don't take time off and take care of yourself, you are doing a disservice to the people you're working with. So even if that feels self-indulgent, the message is you're actually not serving your clients if you don't take care of yourself.
Is this shut off, BlackBerry, go to see a movie?
It's whatever works for various people.
Right.
For me, I'm a bit of an introvert. I need to have time alone. I love to read. I love to write. I have little hobbies.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I run my car on waste vegetable oil, stuff like that.
Seriously?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
That's hilarious. That sounds like another podcast. I don't even know what that means. So what do you got? Like a bottle of Mazola corn oil that you're pouring into your?
Yeah, I do.
Seriously?
Restaurants give it to me. Waste oil.
So you just pull up to like the greasy spoon and say, "Hey guys, you got a quart for me?"
Well,
today,
I got about 3 restaurants and chip truck guys that supply me with their oil.
Okay. And there's a comedy routine going on here, Mark, that we need to explore. I got this shot of a chip truck pulling up beside your Firefly or whatever you drive, and you got a siphon, and you're siphoning out the grease into your car.
It's almost like that, not quite.
That's hilarious.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
The emissions are better. It's free, and
that's funny.
It's a Volkswagen diesel engine.
So what did you call it? I gotta write this down.
It's actually the website where I bought a kit. And the website for the kit is greasecar.com out of the U.S.
That's amazing.
And it works like a dream, and I've been doing it for probably 7-8 years. So anyway.
7 or 8 years, wow.
Talk about, I have fun with that.
Yeah,
and
sure
that's
you
a
do.
Diversion.
Well, you can cook some eggs and bacon on the side, right? With what you don't use. I mean, how many people can do that with their fuel?
I don't use new oil, because I don't believe in that.
Right, okay.
But this is waste oil. I recycle it.
Waste oil, wow. Very cool. So I want to talk about a couple things. Before we started rolling, you talked about how difficult it is to run a an office like this. You've got 12 staff. It's, we've got public funding. You've got donors. You've got fee for service.
Right.
I want to get into that. You talked a little bit to me about wraparound work.
Right.
Sounds really interesting and inclusive and so on. And maybe we can move that way. But I wondered if before we got into the more practical side, what's kind of going on in Ontario, Canada, the West, Hamilton? Can I ask that much of a generic question from a mental health perspective?
Absolutely.
Or do I have to go really specific and say, let's talk about whites, or let's talk about blacks, or let's talk about Asian folk, or let's talk about First Nations communities? I'm guessing there's some common threads from a mental health perspective.
One of the big themes for me is, I think over the last number of decades, for whatever reasons, as a society, we've sort of offloaded our responsibility to care for those who are most vulnerable to the professionals. So I was asked one time to give a talk on what keeps me awake at night. And I said, what keeps me awake at night is something I call the professionalization of care. So what that's done, this offloading, is it's overburdened the professional sector. So long waiting lists, short-term services because there's so much demand and so much need. But it's also then disempowered us as communities because we then tend to defer to the experts. We defer to the doctor or the psychiatrist or whomever. And you have this sense that each on their own can't do it. Professionals can't do it, they're overburdened. Communities can't do it, they're disempowered. But together in a different kind of relationship where they actually supported one another and nurtured each other's strengths, maybe they could do it. And so everything that we're doing at Shalem you could describe as a demonstration project in a new or different type of relationship between those two, between communities and professionals. For professionals, it means that we as professionals need to learn how to embed ourselves in communities. And that's more challenging than you might think for professionals. For communities, it means stepping up and assuming their rightful responsibility to care for those who are most vulnerable. So I think that's a general theme that's happening in mental health. We were talking about funding earlier. One of the outcomes of this professionalization of care is that funding is extremely tight, it's difficult. Cutbacks are happening or threaten to happen on a regular basis. I know in children's mental health nowadays, a typical waiting list for a children's mental health center is a year.
Wow.
So things get worse before they can be addressed at an earlier level.
Are you talking about Trillium funding? Are you talking about government funding? Government funding.
And one of the realities in mental health now is, I did a scan a couple of years ago in Ontario, for example. About 90% of children's mental health budgets come from 3 levels of government, 97%.
Wow.
In adult mental health, it's about 84%. And so those sectors, in my view, are pretty vulnerable because they're so dependent on a government purse that's shrinking.
Why is it shrinking? Is it just because tax base is shrinking? Is it because it's not getting the focus that it deserves? Other issues are taking the money away?
It's a really good question.
Yeah.
I mean, and I can't speak to all of it.
Yeah.
Deficits, of course, are big in government right now. But also, it's shrinking in relation to the demand and the need. And so the need keeps rising. And what is that about? Well, I'm not exactly sure, other than I think it has something to do with the breakdown of community for people. Mental health, mental illness tends to isolate folks. And we know that it's in relationship that recovery happens.
So you're saying maybe the money is kind of the same, but the need increases, therefore there's less to go around, to sprinkle around.
Just to give you an example, suicide right now is the leading...
That was a question coming up, yeah.
It's the leading cause of violent death in the world right now, right? So think of the despair that lies underneath that statistic. And how, as a society, as a community, do we respond to that?
Yeah, that's an astounding
Yeah.
kind of stat.
Yeah.
I love your notion of, think about the implications.
Right.
The despair below it. I mean,
Right.
for me in development, same thing,
Right.
There's a water related issue in this community. Well, now let's dig down, no pun intended,
Yeah.
and figure out what's going on.
Yeah.
It's not just about clean water here. There are other issues.
Yeah.
Children are dying of water related diseases.
Right.
What does that mean?
Right.
Right. There's training, there's capacity, there's
Right.
infrastructure,
Right.
there's maybe a disease.
Right.
You got to start peeling back some of those layers. Wow. I mean, is it fair to say why suicide is so high?
Yeah.
I mean, what a crazy question.
It is fair to say, but I can't say that I have the answer.
But isn't it interesting?
Yeah.
I mean, if that's a global killer,
Right.
I mean, cigarettes, okay, cancer, heart disease, too much fat, you got these causal connections. But what's the causal connection to something like suicide? Taking your own life.
Yeah, exactly.
It's, what could you make?
Where is that despair coming from?
Yeah.
And I know, I don't know the answer, but I do know that when people are connected, when they have positive, healthy connections, it's a significant protector against suicide.
So we're back to relationships.
Exactly. Relationships and community.
So I live in a community, North Oakville. We've got these 5.5, 6 foot fences. I talk about this all the time.
Yeah.
How do we get people to, including myself and my family, how do we get people out of our own backyards, Mark? I mean, here you are doing mental health issues in your own backyard, in Ontario, locally, etc. I work sort of more internationally. I get accused sometimes of, gee, what are you working in Cambodia for when you could be working here in Oakville or in Hamilton, right? So that's a whole other issue or conversation. But how do we get people on board? So, as I talk to more social justice folk, as I talk to more experts in their various fields, it is a common question for me now. A, why are you in?
Right.
And why aren't you doing something else?
Right.
Really important for me, depending on the field, of course. And then how do we, you talk about wraparound work, maybe this is a nice little segue.
Yeah.
But how do we, I can't even see my neighbors for crying out loud. Right? And we have our garages in the back, so we pull in the back, we walk in through the garage, we come in through which is kind of lovely. It's not connected to the house. We don't have the car in the front, which is nice, for the community.
Sure.
Very old school. Barely see my neighbors unless there's a snowstorm.
Yeah.
Or I'm playing a bit of hockey with my son. So what do you do with that?
I think there has to be some network, collective group that you or your family members are involved in. Maybe it's a faith community of some kind. Maybe it's Rotary. Maybe it's the school that your kids go to. There's some gathering of people beyond yourselves. Maybe it's a neighborhood association. What we've been doing in Hamilton is a process called Wraparound. And Wraparound is something where a community intentionally says, we will look after the most vulnerable of our members of this community. And so a number of people in Hamilton got together and said, we want to do this. Wraparound is a strength-based process for people who have very complex needs. These are the kinds of situations where that tend to burn out services or tend to burn out churches, for example.
And so just to clarify, so a wraparound, would it be like a group of people coming together?
Yeah.
So it could be an offshoot or a committee or at a Rotary Club?
Exactly,
process?
exactly.
Okay.
And so there's training to become a wraparound facilitator.
Oh, okay. And is this your program?
This is our program.
Nobody else is doing this?
There are other people. There's about 18 wraparound initiatives in Ontario.
Oh, okay.
And it's actually quite big in the U.S., but less so in Canada. But we're involved in an organization called Wrap Canada, which is a national nonprofit to really help promote wraparound across the country.
Oh, so this is something.
Yeah, and
been used.
it's evidence. It's best practice.
As soon as you said it, I go to blanket. I go to embrace. I go to collective hug. Which I guess not everyone's going to go there, but maybe some will go to piggies in a blanket.
So here's how the blanket works.
Yeah.
Wraparound.
Yeah.
So as a wraparound facilitator, and this can be any community member, you meet with a person who wants wraparound, and again, these are significant needs. This is at the very high end of the needs spectrum. And you're learning about their strengths. So what are they good at? What are their hopes and dreams for themselves and for their child or family? We sometimes describe them as system veterans. They've been through all the systems, and the systems are all deficit-based. They're all problem-based because you've got problems and we can fix them. They're a little bit medical model in that way. And so Wraparound is quite different because we're not ignoring that stuff, but we're really interested in what works for them, what their hopes and dreams are, and then what their needs are. As we're doing that strengths and needs discovery, we call it, we're listening for people who could be on their Wraparound team. And that might be a neighbor, it might be an uncle or an aunt, it might be friends, it might be a professional if they want, but the point is that the person chooses who is on their team.
And the person has to say, I need this.
Yes, yes.
In a sense, I come and knock on your door, almost.
It has to be willing to give the Wraparound process a try.
Yeah. And could this be something as simple as, I have a leak in my basement, I need a plumber? Or is this totally based on mental health issues?
It's a kind of situation where you might have someone with mental health issues who also has a child with special needs, and they're dealing with extreme poverty.
Right.
They're about to become homeless. Or, in the midst of all of that, their plumbing has burst and they have no way of
So
dealing
this is
with it.
really practical. This
very
is
practical.
Holistic.
Yes.
It's you're really trying to attend to the various needs of
Because
individuals, which is amazing.
Needs don't come in nice, neat little packages.
Humber College and So Change, we're working on a conference in May of next year, a little shameless plug, May the 1st, called Beyond GDP, Beyond Gross Domestic Product.
Yes.
And not our phrase, but still, it's all based on this notion coming out of Bhutan, very Buddhist country, gross national happiness.
Yep.
Sounds corny, sounds trite in a way, sounds idealistic, but it's about attending to the needs of individuals, like your Wraparound. This isn't just about money, guys.
No, exactly.
This is way deeper than that, and we gotta start talking about these issues in a more holistic, relational, wraparound-like kind of way.
And our service delivery system is set up we call it categorical services. So if you need money, you go to Ontario Works. If you need mental health, you go to the Mental Health Center. If you need whatever else, you need medical attention, you go there. If your child is dealing with the law, you're dealing with the justice system.
It's a friendly support mechanism by the sounds of it.
Yeah. So
and then there's probably all kinds of unexpected outcomes, I would think, that come out of this
absolutely.
as well. Stuff that you guys didn't even see,
Absolutely.
or relationships that I love that stuff.
Right.
What's the opposite of deficit based?
Strength based.
Simply. So what are you good at?
Right. What are you good at? What do you like to do?
Right.
What has worked for you in the past? What's working for you now? What are your hopes and dreams? Where do you want to see yourself in 5 years?
So for me, that's like almost a real practical outpouring of capacity building in a sense, right?
That's right.
So we're not going to just come alongside and stopgap.
Yeah.
We're not just going to give you food for the next 6 months. This is about actually sustainable, healthy living. And
building community around them. So, and it's their own community that they choose. There's a Wraparound Association of Ontario, and we meet. And 1 year we had a young man who came through the Wraparound process successfully from Toronto. He had been living on the streets. And we asked him, what made the Wraparound work for you? And he said it was the fact that I could hire and fire my own team. And we said, okay, that's great, but what about this and what about that? And he said, no. It's the fact that I could hire and fire my own team. In other words, he had control. He was used to being in case conferences with a dozen professionals around that he really did not have control over. I mean, he gave consent, but that's, And there's, I have another colleague who says, I worked with a mom who said, I got to know everyone's footwear really well. Because we would start the case conference and people would keep talking about everything that was wrong with my son. So by the end of the meeting, my head was down and I was looking at everyone's feet.
Isn't that a great story?
Yeah.
That's sad and
exactly.
a real challenge as well, right? We're kind of back to listening again, aren't
That's
we?
right.
Yeah.
Now I don't want to, I want to be careful about this. So many of my colleagues work in that system, and I have great respect for them.
Of course, yeah.
When my arm is broken, I want my doctor to have a deficit-based approach.
Of course,
right?
Of course. But again, the pendulum.
Right. Right.
Balance, hopefully, let it swing one way a little bit. Let's learn from both sides and try to come out with hopefully a more sustainable, holistic, relationally based system, which I think we are really, unfortunately, a long way away from.
Yeah.
But it's conversations like this that encourage the heck out of me. That every now and then, most doctors I meet I wouldn't call them relationally based.
Yeah.
And every now and then you get this doctor that's got nothing but time for you.
Right.
And talks about I remember sitting in a specialist office and I asked him a question about something else. I've had some issues over the last couple of years, and he said, "Well, here, let me pull that up for you. I've got access to that record." I almost fell off my seat. What do you mean? It's outside of your discipline. This isn't who you are, right? This is dermatology. We're talking about, my kidney right now. It was amazing. And I remember I called my wife. I got in the car. I go, holy smokes. You're not going to believe what the experience I just had. But I think that's when the system starts to break down. And when I say the system, I mean that George Orwellian-like system. Right? That's actually not working.
Right.
That's building a fourth wall between me and the patient, or me and the client, or me and the person, or whoever it is. And that fence in my backyard.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
And and that's when I start getting hopeful. In fact, I'm getting a little bit of a shiver right now.
Yeah, good.
It's but 7 out of 10 days, say it all the time, I'm going to turn the world upside down. 3 out of 10, I'm
right.
I'm done. I'm out.
That's real.
You're on your own.
That's real.
You're on your own. So. Yeah, I mean, I love where you guys are heading. We're gonna have to wrap up the conversation shortly, and it just, once again, so much more going on than meets the eye with these kinds of things. And what yesterday, driving along Richmond or Adelaide, driving by the Sheraton, somebody in the car. 6:30 at night. It's raining, maybe going to snow, quite cold, and I look over and. I had been out a year and a half ago with my family, staying overnight at the Sheraton in Toronto. It was a New Year's kind of thing. And there was a man lying there on the corner. And I remember it very specifically. In fact, I started to write something about it back then. Don't know if it was the same guy I saw last night, but there was a man there. And I drove by and we sort of stopped because of the traffic. And I wanted to get out.
Right.
Honestly, I wanted to get out and help this guy. Watched a few people walk by. What can I do?
Yeah, that's very tough.
I'm in the field. I'm in the field of international development. I want to change the way people see the world. I want to compel people to get out of their cars and help, and to make a difference, and to chisel away at that system. And here I drove by. Right. So I mean, I would imagine there's some mental health going on issues with this individual. And I don't mean that in a judgmental or critical way at all. Maybe we've got some other issues, but that whole "there but for the grace of God go I." What the heck do I do? What do others do at that point, Mark? I mean, is there anything you can?
I think it's very challenging. I mean, I hang out with a guy who is pretty much on the streets, he's dealing with paranoid schizophrenia, and he's a little bit developmentally delayed. He's been rejected by his family. And he's in his mid-30s, and he's climbing more and more into addiction. He's on Oxycontins and Percocets and you name it. Crack cocaine,
pretty serious
alcohol.
drugs.
Alcohol is actually one of the worst things for him. So, and it's very challenging. But I try to be friends with him, and we get together. I don't give him money anymore because I know he's buying drugs, but I buy him food.
Sure.
And we have a good time. He loves music, and so I burn CDs for him, and that's a huge gift for him.
Right.
I think it's very individual what our responses are, and I think we can't do everything. And I think it's important not to beat ourselves up for that.
Yeah, I think so too. I don't know. I'm just always so uncomfortable with that. I mean, I hear what you're saying. But I don't want to get into the whole guilt and shame thing around I'm not doing enough, because now we're talking about me again and my own insecurities and all of that. But truthfully, from a needs-based perspective, how do you help somebody like that, and like you say, I mean, I think it is individual. I think, what I think too, Mark, is, I don't know how you feel about this, but believing that when we do burn CDs or take someone out for lunch, that we are having, there is an impact there. We're making a difference on some level.
Right, I think so.
My things, little things, incrementalism, going to make a difference one day. I don't know that we all really believe that,
Sure. I believe that.
Yeah, it's good.
I think there's a bigger picture. He says to me, Mark, you're such a good friend to me. And I it's so challenging to be a friend that I get very exasperated.
Right.
But
right.
That's enough to keep me in there.
Yeah.
And I know he's got almost no one.
Yeah.
Virtually no one, other than folks who are selling him drugs. So I think stepping out of ourselves to try to make a difference in some context, trying to be a community member that starts to be intentional about looking after our vulnerable community members, that's what it's about. And whether it's that specific person, I mean, like I say, we can't do everything for everyone.
That's good. Thank you for your time today, your generosity. I feel like we need to do 7 or 8 more interviews to really get to the work, the real substance here. But thanks for joining us, Mark Vander Vennen from the Shalem Network, and that's SHALEM network.org. Check them out online. You can get involved. You can donate now. I'm sure there's volunteer opportunities, certainly even just to get a better sense for what the heck is going on in this crazy, beautiful world that we live in. Thanks again, Mark, for joining us.
Thank you, David. It's a treat.